Can't decide and torn between a romantic, comedy, action, or an indie film to watch for the weekend? Well. Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast is your ultimate guide to the latest movies. Join us as we dissect the latest on the blockbusters. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Elizabeth Aaron. Hi, everybody. Here we are. It's October, officially fall. And as we continue to shelter in place, I don't know about you, but I am definitely feeling the season. I'm seeing the leaves turn and the sunlight change. It is definitely upon us. At my home, we have a funny saying. As soon as 4th of July hits, you might as well say happy holidays because time goes so fast the second half of the year. For my podcast today, I decided to look at some movies where I felt that relationships are going to be the key focus. And as it turns out, it seemed to me that in all of these movies, the theme of home was somehow embedded in it. So we'll be taking a look at that. In the first segment of the show, I'll be looking at a movie called Residue, which just came out on Netflix about 2 weeks ago. In the second segment, I'll be sharing my thoughts on a movie that I streamed on Amazon Prime called Like Sunday Like Rain. In the third segment, I went back to Netflix and watched a movie called Christine, and I'll be telling you about that. And then stick around for the final segment of the show when I'll be talking about the movie Tortilla Soup, which I also streamed on Netflix. So let's dive on in. As I mentioned, the first movie that I'm going to look at is called Residue. This movie came out in January of this year. It's an hour and 30 minutes long, and it's a drama. And it deals with social issues. This movie definitely has an independent movie feel to it. It's rated TVMA, which means it's for mature audiences. It's described as an understated movie as well as a cerebral movie, and it is an award winner. It won 2 awards at the Slamdance Film Festival. It won the Best Narrative Feature Award, as well as the Slamdance Acting Award, which went to the main actor, who is Obinna Nwachukwu. He plays our protagonist, Jay. It's directed by Marawi Jurima, and this is his first film. He also wrote this movie, and it takes place in Eckington, which is a Washington, D.C. neighborhood. If you'd like to get more information about the background of this movie, there's an interesting article about it in the Washingtonian, which you can find online in the September 28th, 2020 edition. And the article talks about how this director is putting his own life on display in this feature film. So it's good to know that there is something autobiographical about this movie. And as I mentioned, it stars Obinna Nwachukwu, and this is his first major role in a feature film. And that is the case for most of the actors in this movie. And the acting was very good in this movie, so I'll give a shout out to a few of them. Melody A. Talley played Jay's mom. Ramon Thompson played Jay's dad, and Talene Stewart played Jay's girlfriend, Blue. The summary on Netflix of this movie is a young screenwriter returns to his hometown to write a script based on his childhood and discovers his neighborhood has been gentrified. So right away we see the theme of home and what it's like to come home after you've been away for a while. The movie starts out with some very interesting camera work. We see scenes with gatherings of lots of people, especially Black people. And honestly, it was a little bit hard to tell if this was a riot, if this was a protest, if it was just people gathering to celebrate, because there were instances of all of those things happening. But no matter what it was definitely a sense of defiance against authority, especially police. Next, we see that our protagonist, Jay, is driving across country, and then he lands with his white truck in the Washington, D.C. area. He's all set up to live in a basement studio apartment. It's in a building where he grew up, and his parents still own it, but they live in a home elsewhere. It's a little bit hard to tell how long Jay has been away. On one hand, it feels like it's been years. but he's still rather young, and sometimes when you come back home, it can feel like you've been away for a long time, but it hasn't been. I think this is an open question. There are some references to him being away for a while, but it's just hard to tell if it's been 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. So something to keep in mind and maybe watch for. After Jay settles in, he checks out the neighborhood. He expects that he's going to see his old buddies around, and while he sees a few people that he knows, things have changed. There are buildings that have been gutted or repainted. People have moved out, and there's a culture shift. One of the first things that happens to him is he double parks on the street in front of the apartment, and a white guy comes over and tells him to not do that. Jay kind of looks at him like he's a Martian, like how does he belong there? This was not part of a white neighborhood in the past. Jay then goes to visit his parents' home, which is in a tree-lined neighborhood, and he sees somebody walk away from the house, and he has a bunch of flyers and a clipboard. So Jay goes to his parents' door, and he finds a pink flyer on it, asking if his parents are interested in selling their house. So with all of these elements, we are seeing that there's a gentrification going on, and that with it, there is some kind of cultural tension and war. As Jay later puts it, it seems that gentrification is somehow erasing the history that had been there before. Jay takes a seat in a chair in his parents' living room, and he falls asleep. And when he wakes up, he finds his father is there working on a computer, and they have a very nonchalant greeting. It's kind of humorous, and it made me question a little bit. If a father and son hadn't seen each other in some time because the son had gone to California, wouldn't they be excited to see each other and hug each other? They seem to have a lot of respect for each other, but also this kind of sense that they didn't need all of that. They just knew where each other stood. But when his mother comes home, it's a different story. She is full of hugs, and they have a pretty happy reunion. Back in the neighborhood where Jay is living, we have a scene where he is with a woman. We take it that she is a girlfriend, or at the very least, a former lover. And then we see Jay reconnect with other people in the neighborhood. He knocks on a neighbor's door, hoping to see an old friend, Demetrius, and he discovers there's a white guy living in the house, and he's totally taken aback. And this sets up the next part of the movie, where he is trying to find his friend Demetrius. He continues to ask people he knows what they know about him, and nobody seems to be willing to come clean about Demetrius. They all push the question back on him. Why do you want to know? Why don't you find him for yourself? And Jay is just scratching his head about this. And the longer he stays, the more memories come up about him and Demetrius. Demetrius was like his best friend, but he kind of lost touch when he left for California. But it seems he lost touch with a lot of people. He makes discoveries of what people's lives were like during the time he was gone. 2 of his friends who were brothers were in prison. One of them just got out. Jay talks to some guys sitting on a stoop. They seem to be old-timers there and know a lot about the neighborhood. They've stuck around, and they say they thought they had heard that Demetrius moved to Maryland, but they hadn't seen him around for some time. And at one point after Jay leaves, one of them comments, "Didn't Demetrius move like 15 years ago?" So this is a first clue for how long Jay may have been away. Also the fact that a lot of people don't recognize him because he's now a man. Well, maybe he was away that long. It still doesn't quite add up to me in the movie, just because personally I find it hard to think that Jay would have been away for that long and not come back and visited and caught up with people, or that he would have completely lost touch with everybody, especially when he was so close to them. So this is an ongoing question that's been nagging at me. In any case, this idea of searching for Demetrius is an ongoing theme in the movie. Jay has come back because in Los Angeles, where he was living, he had become a filmmaker, and he wanted to come back into a film about his neighborhood. But what he didn't expect was the movie was not necessarily going to look like he'd expected because there's so many changes happening in his neighborhood. Although there's not a huge emphasis on him actually making the movie, there is this underlying thread about this is why he is actually here, and it feels like the rug was pulled out from under him because home is really not home anymore. We get to see memories that Jay has. We get to see him with Demetrius and the other kids in the neighborhood, and what a free and lovely time it was. Granted, there are times, too, where they were dealing with racism, and they learned that the hard way. At the same time, there was a bonding and a love and an innocence between Jay and his friends. and it is clearly something that's nostalgic for him. There's also a point where his mother reminds Jay that he had received some letters from a friend of his who had been put into prison. There's a sense that being put into prison is just a regular, everyday thing for the Black people in this neighborhood, that it's not a surprise, and you're just lucky if you didn't get in. And after dealing with some procrastination, as well as some urging from his mother, and after a tragedy happens to someone in a family that Jay had been friends with when he was a kid, he finally musters up what appears to be courage in order to visit this friend. It is this visit with his friend that really stood out to me in this movie. The way the director dealt with the scene was very unique and original, and I'd say it's definitely one of the standouts for me in this movie. I don't want to give away how it played out, because it's something that I think you should look forward to when you see the movie. But what I will say is the director had a way of transporting Jay and his friend to kind of another mind space that allowed them to communicate. The space is like the thing that they remember as kids, the thing that kept their innocence and their connection. It was very symbolic, and yet it worked really well, I felt. I also don't want to give away what happened with regard to Demetrius and how that mystery was handled, but I'd say more than anything, for me, that was the through line that kept me involved in the movie. Something else that kept me interested was the camera work in the movie. There are some very interesting ways that scenes were pulled together. Sometimes they were cloudy, sometimes they had an eeriness about them. I felt that they were leading to something. They definitely painted a tone within the particular scenes that they covered. They presented a sense of fuzziness or disconnection that I think is important in the movie. Now, another theme that kept popping up had to do with racism, but not just black and white racism, also racism within the Black community. Or if it wasn't racism, it could have been privilege. I'm not sure it was always clear to me, but that there were tensions was clear. Jay kept finding that his buttons were getting pushed by people around him. He felt that he wasn't being treated fairly, or he was being seen in a way that he didn't want to be seen. He was continually tempted to put up a fight, actually get into a physical fist fight and try and beat someone up. And while in particular, it's his mom and his girlfriend who hold him back, and they say that he needs to pick and choose the fights that he wants to have, we see that Jay gets angrier and angrier by what's happening in his neighborhood, what's happening to some of the people that he loves in his neighborhood. We see the regret that he's had for being away for so long and the impact that that potentially has on the people that he loved in his neighborhood. We also see in moments that he even has some PTSD. So as this tension within him builds, it does culminate at the end, and I'm not going to say what happens, but what it essentially shows is how easy it can be for someone who is Black to fall into the grips of the game of racism. That if the pressures don't let up, and if they don't have a healthy way of expressing the stress and anxiety that comes up as a result of the racism and the pressures in the Black community, it seems almost anything is game in terms of trying to find a way to find justice for yourself. And this can get you into trouble, or at the very least put you at risk for it. I think it's interesting that there are moments also where the story is being told through the eyes of white people. It happens kind of in a fuzzy way earlier on, but more towards the end. There's definitely a situation where that happens, and it's clear that there is no understanding at all by white people of the history of a neighborhood or of the Black experience in general. I thought the acting was quite good in this movie, especially considering this is the first feature film for many of the actors. Granted, there were not a lot of long scenes, and there were not many scenes where the actors really got into it. It wasn't very theatrical at all. It felt like a lot of the emotion came out with regard to camera work, actually. At least that's the sense that I had. And I found that to be very interesting. The incidences where there were actors working together, I felt that they were realistic. I believed their relationship, and they felt very connected to me. In fact, I'd even say that in many of the scenes, there was a level of intimacy that seemed to go deep quickly. I believed that the characters did have a history together, and that they knew things about each other that went way back. And that can sometimes be hard to pull off. So I think that this was an achievement for sure. I think this was also a very original story, as well as one that's important to be told. I couldn't help but think about Indigenous people and how so much of their land and their history was erased when white men came to America and overpowered them. It felt to me like Jay was witnessing that here in his neighborhood. He was feeling a lot of anger on behalf of all of his people. And it's interesting, back in June, I reviewed a movie called Miss Virginia, and it takes place in the same neighborhood or thereabouts. And while that was an important movie, and it talked about a woman who is a mover and a shaker and making change happen in the neighborhood, its message was rather uplifting, and it was about how one person can make a difference. The tone in this movie is very different. It's darker, it's grittier. It seems to me that its aim, especially with the camera work, is to really help the viewer have the experience of walking in the shoes of someone who has gone back to this neighborhood and sees what the changes are, and sees how there's a level of disregard for a history in a place. I say both movies are powerful in their own way. They're very different stories. In this movie, though, I felt that the grit, the difficulty, the contrast that we're exposed to seeped in deeper inside of me. It had more of a profound effect, I think. I do recommend this movie. I think it has an important message. I think it is well done. I do think that in some ways it was challenging to watch, not because of the content, but I think it takes some patience to watch it. Part of it is the camera work and trying to see through it. Because of some of the camera work, I didn't always understand what was happening in the moment. There was some confusion, which may have been on purpose, I'm not sure. Also, at the beginning, the opening scenes with the shots in Los Angeles, they lasted quite a while. I wasn't completely sure what the purpose of them was for, and I just wasn't sure where the story was going. I wished that opening had been cut shorter, or that had been used in a different way, so that the story could just move forward, that we could just dive on in and understand why Jay was there and what was going on. But it took some time before we were even really introduced to him. And other than the amount of time that Jay was away, I found sometimes it was hard to track who the different characters were and what their role had been in Jay's life. So that's just something to keep in mind. Do be patient with it because I think it does pay off. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I'd give this one a 7. I think it is well worth watching, and yet these elements that I talked about can make the movie a little bit challenging. Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be talking about the movie Like Sunday, Like Rain after the break.
Want to know the latest and hottest music hitting the airwaves? Don't be left out. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Music Podcast. It keeps you on the loop with everything you need to know from pop, rock, hip-hop, and the top 40. And we'll throw in news of your favorite artists, concert and tour dates, and so much more. Listen no further because this is the gold standard in music podcast.
Thanks for joining the second segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie Residue. I'm now going to discuss the movie Like Sunday, Like Rain. As I mentioned, I streamed this movie on Amazon Prime. It came out in 2014. It's a drama, and there's also quite a bit of music in it. It's rated R, and it's an hour and 44 minutes long. This movie won the Audience Choice for Feature Film Drama at the Sedona International Film Festival, and this movie seemed to sweep up all kinds of awards at the Williamsburg Independent Film Festival, US. It won Best Actor for Billie Joe Armstrong, who was featured. It won Best Actress for Leighton Meester. It won Best Director for Frank Watley. It won Best Feature, and it also won Best Featured Actress for Deborah Messing. The director, Frank Watley, also wrote the screenplay for this movie. Now, he is known more as an actor than a director. He has 118 acting credits. Won Best Actor for a movie called Pursuit of Happiness, not the one with Will Smith, a different one, and that was at the New York International Independent Film and Video Festival. He also won the Festival Achievement Award for Outstanding Contribution to Independent Cinema at the Stony Brook Film Festival. And he had a tied win for the Waldo Salt Screenwriting Award at the Sundance Film Festival. In this case, it's for the film Joe the King. Like Sunday Like Rain is his fourth movie. Besides Joe the King, he directed The Jimmy Show and New York City Serenade, and is a new movie in pre-production called Winning the City. This movie stars Julian Shotkin. He plays the role of a boy in this movie named Reggie, and he is one of the lead roles. He only had a few film credits prior to being in this movie, but after the movie, he was in the movie Chosen in 2016, and he's in the 2020 movie What We Found. And this movie stars Leighton Meester. She has won Choice TV Actress for a drama for Gossip Girl for 3 years in a row at the Teen Choice Awards. She also won a Spotlight Award at the Hollywood Film Awards. Besides being in a bunch of television, she's been in such movies as Country Strong, The Roommate, Monte Carlo, and Of Mice and Men. And this movie stars Deborah Messing. She won a Primetime Emmy Award as Outstanding Lead Actress in a Comedy Series for Will and Grace. She's been nominated for a number of Golden Globes as well as other Emmys. She won Excellence in Media at the GLAAD Media Awards, and she won Outstanding Female Lead for a miniseries for The Starter Wife at the Gracie Allen Awards. She has also won a number of other awards for her appearance in Will and Grace. Although most of her work has been in television, she has been in such movies as The Mothman Prophecies, A Walk in the Clouds, The Wedding Date, Lucky You, and Albion the Enchanted Stallion. Deborah Messing plays Barbara, who is Reggie's mother, and Leighton Meester plays Eleanor, who becomes Reggie's caretaker. This movie is about two people who unexpectedly cross paths. Their normal lives would never have brought them together, but circumstances have brought them together, and they have a really deep connection. And it's somewhat unexpected because there's quite an age difference between the two. One is Reggie, who may be 10, 11, just about a tween, and the other is Eleanor, who is probably in her early 20s. In the beginning, we see snapshots of both of their lives. We see Reggie, who is a child prodigy. Other than an overbearing mother and a woman who does the cooking and housework, he's all alone in a gigantic mansion. We get to see that his mother is kind of crazy. She's quick to anger. She demands her way. She's not an easy person. And it's also clear that being a mother is not something that comes naturally to her. It doesn't seem like she even really tries. Having a son like Reggie is just another project on her list. There are moments where she does show that she cares, but it's based on Reggie's behavior. She knows him inside and out, and knows his bad habits. She knows how he'll rebel by eating a certain way or refusing to get a ride to school, preferring to walk. But how she responds to these things, it seems like it's just something that she tries to control. She doesn't work with Reggie on it. She doesn't have conversations with him that are intimate or caring. Meanwhile, we get to see Eleanor. She wakes up in an apartment. It's a small studio apartment, and she recognizes that she's alone and that she was expecting her boyfriend to come home. We find out this is not the first time that this has happened, and she's had it. So she walks out. When her boyfriend tracks her down, he finds her at work, which is at a restaurant, and because she already seems a bit unreliable in the eyes of her boss, he uses this opportunity to fire her. Without a place to live and without any money coming in, Eleanor is kind of not sure what she's going to do. She calls home, and we get to see that home is not a very supportive place. She crashes at a friend's, and through the friend gets a lead about an agency that hires people temporarily to take care of children. She gets a lead right away to go over to Reggie's home. And a bit desperate to find someone to look after Reggie before she leaves right away on a trip, Reggie's mother hires Eleanor. And Eleanor now has a place to stay, as well as a job. I will say that one hole in the story is that the person who does the intake for Eleanor at the agency for caretakers She opts to send Eleanor out on this job before she's done a thorough background check. She claims that she doesn't want to risk losing this job, but I would think that the liability level would be rather high. She's also done very little grilling of Eleanor to find out about her background, so this I did not really buy. In any case, the first thing that Eleanor is told to do is to go pick Reggie up at school. Reggie's mom has hired a driver to transport Reggie back and forth from school. Reggie plays the cello, and so he's a small boy, and he carries this big cello. It's kind of heavy for him, and it's a big deal. And so his mother does take care of him and wants to make sure that he can get to and from school easily. She pays a lot of money for this driver, and yet Reggie really refuses to go along in this car. So with this first thing that she has to do, Eleanor hops in the car with the driver and heads over to the school. When she gets there, she asks somebody for some directions, and she finds her way to the room where it turns out Reggie is playing the cello with a few other musicians. Eleanor sits and listens, and she's enthralled. Afterwards, she introduces herself to Reggie, and when they leave school together, she insists that they get in the car, and Reggie insists that he will walk home. So she lets him, and she follows him, and then she eventually connects with him, and they start their relationship. Eleanor pretty much gives Reggie the benefit of the doubt. While on one hand, it seems Reggie's mom wants somebody to kind of be a surrogate mother for him, Eleanor really sees Reggie as his own person. It's clear that he's a prodigy. It's clear that he knows what he wants. And so she just goes along with it. She lets him have the freedom that he desires, and this makes him so happy. And it's something that really helps him connect more to her. And through the next part of the movie, we get to see the two make discoveries about each other. Eleanor learns how lonely Reggie is. She sees how he plays the cello in a pool that is in this mansion, but is not filled. It's never quite been retiled, as his mother had hoped to do. It's one of her ongoing projects that she never gets to. And as he says, it's the place with the best acoustics in the house. He also spends a lot of time reading. He seems to have just one friend who he'll play some games with, but he always outsmarts him. And he even kind of teases him and puts him down. Reggie also seems to have the helper in the house wrapped around his finger. He knows how to get what he wants from her. And yet he really is isolated and alone and kind of depressed. He seems to find it hard to figure out where he belongs in life. Being a prodigy, he understands things beyond many adults. We even see a scene where he's in the classroom, he's staring out the window, and the teacher calls on him. The teacher is kind of miffed, feeling that Reggie's just not paying attention. But Reggie, finally making eye contact with the teacher, not only tells the teacher the answer, but he gives him more information, way above and beyond than what the teacher expected. And probably more than the teacher even knew himself. And then Reggie just turns back looking out the window. It's clear that Reggie's been listening, but he's just utterly bored. He knows all this stuff that the teacher is teaching already. And as we see Eleanor and Reggie together more, Reggie, we find out, has lots of facts stored in his mind, and he's constantly educating Eleanor on things from history, as well as the arts and other areas. And the one thing that does seem to make Reggie a little more engaged is art. His music playing. He actually wrote the piece that he was practicing with the other musicians at the school, and when Eleanor found that out, she was just blown away. It was very beautiful, though also sad. Reggie enjoys reading and poetry. Those are the things that are not based on fact and based on intellect per se, and so they feed him on more of a soul level, but he doesn't really have anyone to share them with until he meets Eleanor. So he and Eleanor end up going off and having all kinds of adventures. Now it turns out Eleanor is supposed to send Reggie off to a day camp for the summer, but Reggie does what he does. He pays off the camp counselor to say that he has been to camp, but then he goes off and does his own thing, which is much more appealing to him. It's similar to how he treats the driver who's supposed to bring him back and forth to school. Eleanor's a bit appalled at first and doesn't quite know what to do, but as I mentioned earlier, Eleanor seems to prescribe to the live and let live theory and lets Reggie do what he wants to do. So Reggie invites her, instead of going to camp, to go off and do fun things in the area, things that he enjoys, He often takes her out and wines and dines her with fantastic food. His family is wealthy. They have an enormous mansion. They can afford these kinds of things. And so the two end up being kind of sidekicks, where they're both bucking the system and enjoying life. The fact that they're both kind of rebels really gives them a connection and gives them something that they're both trying to get away with. And this creates a bond and a stronger trust between them. Now, there comes a point where Eleanor gets a call that her father is not well, and she has to go back and see him. And she asks a friend to come look after Reggie, but Reggie says, "Why can't I just go with you?" So they set off on an adventure and go back to Eleanor's hometown. And Reggie gets to see how dysfunctional Eleanor's family is. And Reggie ends up being a voice of reason. In many ways, he's more of an adult. He asks key questions, and he helps Eleanor suss out what would actually be in their best interest. And Eleanor even talks about how she feels she's fallen short in terms of how Reggie needs to be taken care of. Reggie bucks up and talks about how he knows so much and he's so sure of himself that he doesn't need really to be taken care of. And yet there does seem to be some element that he's not acknowledging, and that he himself is like a child and needs help. And Eleanor, she is just very practical and down to earth and honest in the moment. And these are all things that Reggie probably has craved in friendships and relationships with others. It almost appears as if Reggie's maturity is similar to what Eleanor's maturity is. And were it not for an age difference, I wouldn't be surprised if they would have a more formal love relationship. And I would say this is probably the oddest part of this movie. Trying to figure out their relationship. It couldn't quite be nailed down or defined. It seemed to cross so many different layers and boundaries. And were it not for their ages, I do think their relationship would have taken off in a very different direction. And I would say that in their friendship, because we know that it's not permanent, Eleanor is supposed to be a temporary caretaker. Both Eleanor and Reggie learn about love in a whole new manner. And it's as if destiny, in a way, set them up to have this time together so that they could both learn important things about being human, having a human relationship, and having human interactions. And I mentioned the theme of today's podcast was home. And in this case, I feel both Eleanor and Reggie found home within each other. We get to see what their real homes were like and how they didn't feel quite at home in either of those places. But when they were together, there was a bond and something that helped them feel at ease, the way someone probably should feel when they're at home. Now, I did watch this movie at night, but I've watched a lot of movies at night, and they don't always have an impact on me. But with this movie, I actually had a dream that took some of the elements from the movie, and I dreamt about it. And when that happens, I think, okay, was it just because I saw it late at night? And I think in this case, there was something oddly archetypal about what happened in this relationship. And I felt that it actually spoke to me on a deep level in a surprising way. The movie was very subtle. There wasn't a lot of big action. And I would even say that there weren't even any super memorable pieces. And yet somehow this movie really sunk in for me, and maybe it would do the same for you. I do recommend it. I think the acting was really well done. It was very clear who the characters were, what their quirks were, what they stood for, and how they cared about each other or didn't. Felt they related to each other well. You could tell who impacted someone in a certain way. For example, I think Eleanor was a bit intimidated by Reggie's mother. And I think Reggie showed that he was okay on his own, he could be independent, and yet he could show a childish side. It was a side that he was really trying to hide, but it still seeped through of the fact that he was a child and did have needs. Now, in terms of the story, I did point out earlier a few minor holes in the story, but what I did really appreciate about this movie was how Eleanor was able to demonstrate for Reggie that it's okay to have a messy life. It's okay not to know what's going to happen next and to figure it out as you go along. And I love that Reggie was curious and would ask Eleanor questions about life. It was a whole realm of learning for him outside of books and school. This didn't call for his intellectual smarts, his genius. It called for him to find out more about what it's like to be truly human and to have a full human experience. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most excellent movie, I think I'd give this one a 7. Worth watching and not perfect, but that's kind of the point of the movie anyway, isn't it? Now stay tuned for the next segment of the show when I'll be talking about the movie Christine after the break.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome to the third segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie Like Sunday, Like Rain. I'm now going to discuss the movie Christine. This movie came out in 2016. It's a biography and drama, and it's based on truth. It's an hour and 59 minutes long, and it's rated R. This movie won the Unsung Film of the Year award through Gallica, which is the Society of LGBTQ Entertainment Critics. And the lead actress, Rebecca Hall, who plays Christine, won many awards. She won Best Actress awards through the Central Ohio Film Critics Association, the Chicago International Film Festival, the Indiana Film Journalists Association US, and she also won the Courage in Acting Award through the Women Film Critics Circle Awards. Antonio Campos directed the film. He is an award-winning director. He won an award at the Cannes Film Festival for the movie Buy It Now. He won an audience award for the same film at the Cine Vegas International Film Festival. He shared the New Generation Award through the Los Angeles Film Critics Association Awards for Mary, Marcy, May, Marlene. And he won the Special Jury Prize for Experimental Narrative for the movie After School through the Nashville Film Festival. As I mentioned, Rebecca Hall plays the protagonist in this movie, who is Christine Chubbuck, and she is an award-winning actress. One of her biggest awards is Best Supporting Actress for Red Riding the Year of Our Lord 1974 at the BAFTA Awards. She's also been nominated for a Golden Globe. She won the Best Actress Award for Parade's End through the Broadcasting Press Guild Awards, and she's won a good number of awards for being part of ensemble casts for a variety of movies. Other movies she's been in include The Prestige, Frost Nixon, Dorian Gray, Iron Man 3, The Gift, Holmes and Watson, and A Rainy Day in New York. And this movie stars Michael C. Hall. He won a Golden Globe for Best Performance by an Actor in a Television Series Drama for Dexter. He also won Best Actor on Television for Dexter at the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror Films USA. And among other awards for Dexter, he also won Outstanding Actor Drama Series for 6 Feet Under at the Monte Carlo TV Festival. Other movies he's been in include Paycheck, Gamer, Kill Your Darlings, After Adderall, Game Night, The Report, and In the Shadow of the Moon. This movie also stars Tracy Letts. He earned a Pulitzer Prize for writing the play August Osage County, and he's also won some acting awards. He is one of the winners of Best Ensemble Cast for Lady Bird at the Awards Circuit Community Awards. as well as at the Cinephore Awards. He's been in quite a bit of television, but in terms of movies, he's been in The Big Short, Elvis and Nixon, The Lovers, The Post, Ford vs. Ferrari, and Little Women. This is an independent movie, and the summary that Netflix has for this movie is, in a film based on true events, an awkward but ambitious TV reporter struggles to adapt when she's ordered to focus on violent and salacious stories. When I first read that description, I wasn't sure I wanted to see this movie, but I kept passing over it and being curious, so I finally decided to give it a try. This movie was not at all what I expected. Because this summary mentioned violent and salacious stories, I thought maybe this movie was going to be full of those kinds of stories and it would be very upsetting. I'm trying to stay away from things like that with so much going on in the world. But that wasn't really the case. Turns out that our protagonist, Christine Chubbuck, works at a news station in Florida. Tracy Letts plays her boss, and he explains to the whole news team that their ratings are plummeting, and they have to do something about it in order for them to keep their jobs. Now, this movie takes place back in the 1970s, and Letts' character Michael explains that what seems to be getting the attention of audiences are stories that have some kind of shock value, and these tend to be stories that have violence in them or that are salacious. So here Christine is being told that she needs to shift the focus of her stories. We see from the very beginning that Christine is devoted. She does a fantastic job. She seems buttoned up and very solid on camera. She cares about the little details and making her work outstanding. So when she hears this news, she recognizes that this is not within her value system, and she's trying to figure out how to make peace with it and to accept it and see if she can indeed help the station improve its ratings. Over time, though, we get to see that the president of the station, who owns a number of news outlets throughout the country, and is very wealthy, he's come to investigate what's going on at this news station, and he's there for reasons that are unclear to all the staff. Christine fears for her job, and she's not alone considering their ratings are not good. But eventually we learn he's there actually for beneficial reasons. He's checking out the talent and seeing how they're doing and if they can be used in a different market. So Christine sets her sights on being a star. She wants to be the one that's chosen to go to Baltimore, which would be a much bigger market and really help her career move forward. As the movie goes on, we get to see more and more intimately what Christine's life is like, the kind of person she is, and how human she really is. She had been with a news group up in Boston, and things didn't work out right, partly because she was having some apparently emotional difficulties, so she came back to Florida to live with her mother. And while for the most part that seems to be working out okay, she and her mother get into conflict quite a bit. Her mother wants what's best for Christine, and Christine kind of can't decide, should she treat her mother like a roommate, like her mom, like a friend? It seems to help her save her own dignity and respect for herself. It's just hard for her to be living with her mom at this stage of her life, and so she needs to define what that relationship is for herself so she can feel better about it. And I think Christine is really wanting to find where her true home is. Is it with her mom? If she goes to Baltimore, will she be able to make a true home for herself there? And here she thought Florida was going to be her true home, but with the changes happening in her job, things look a little more precarious than she thought. And so often when we think of our true home, we think of it as the people that we choose to stay connected to, whether it's our family or some loved ones, some friends, even people on a job. So for Christine, she is feeling, I think, a little bit unrooted, but maybe not even consciously. It seems she really wants to find a place where she can land. Indeed, as the movie goes on, it seems the harder she tries to make connections and to feel settled, the more people keep seeming to fall away. Meanwhile, there's a main anchor at the news station that Christine is kind of interested in. She's been too shy to make it known to him, but her mother keeps encouraging her to look into whether a relationship might be possible. Eventually, we see that this news anchor may have similar interests in Christine as she does in him. At first, Christine is really shy about it, but eventually there's an opportunity for them to get together. But things turn out a little differently than she planned. Also, her mother starts dating someone, and this adds a whole new wrinkle to her relationship with her mother. She doesn't want to have to walk on eggshells because her mother has a man over. We see over time that Christine is not the easiest person to get along with. At the beginning, she seems super straightforward and easy to work with and easy to live with. But when things don't quite go her way or she gets let down somehow, she takes it deeply personally. And we start to see her have a little bit of a downward spiral over time. We also see that she doesn't give up hope on the possibility that she could be one of the people that is sent to another station. So she gets a police scanner, and she listens to the police talking about different things that are happening in terms of out in the world, are there robberies, that kind of thing. But she also gets to hear the inner dialogue, where the police officers are making sexist remarks against women. She gets exposed to the darker side of things, and she doesn't quite know what to do with it. It's really uncomfortable for her. It seems that much of the movie is focused on her determination to make a change and to get out of Florida. So the audience gets caught up in her quest, and we get to see all the different things that she does. She does a little bit of what appears to be undercover work. She gets very excited about some creative ideas she has, and she's quick to interrupt meetings that her boss is having with other members of the news team. She seems to have no boundaries and feel like she's the one who can take priority. She thinks she's the best. And yet her ideas, while they are original, they may be a little bit ahead of her time, but they're not something that her boss is really willing to take seriously. He just wants her to toe the line. With all this, she just keeps getting beaten down and beaten down. And ultimately, this culminates in something happening on the air at the end. And I'm not going to reveal what it is. I'll give you a heads up that it's shocking and gory. And at the same time, it's really powerful. Now, the acting in this movie is terrific. Rebecca Hall, I think, is in just about every scene. And she convincingly shows the mental breakdown that Christine is having over time. She's very convincing. I also appreciated that I didn't see what was coming at the end. It was clear that something was off and something had changed with her character, but the end was definitely a surprise. And I think that was definitely done on purpose, not just for the dramatic effect, but I think what happened in real life was definitely a surprise to everybody. And considering when this movie took place, back in the 1970s, it makes a lot of sense that this would be so shocking and that there was a lot that wasn't necessarily known about mental health at that time. Or in any case, there's a lot more that we know now about mental health and mental illness. And there are a lot more resources now. And there's just a lot more widespread information about what being mentally healthy means. As far as the other actors go, they all gave very strong performances. They each had distinct personalities. They played their parts consistently. They connected well with each other. And most of the time that I was watching the movie, I was pretty riveted. Their facial expressions, the energy that they held, they really captured a presence. I guess you could say they had charisma. As for the story, so this is based on true life, but there were choices made in terms of how the story was told. And I have to say, I think this is the first movie in a long time that told a story very linearly. There weren't any flashbacks that I recall. It was just straightforward. This is what happened at the start of the movie, and each scene carried us through the next steps till we get to the end result of the movie. And there was something refreshing about that. It was nice to be swept along from beginning to end without any breaks. My mind didn't have to do any extra work to try and sum things up, figure out what happened in the past, what was in the present, any of that. It really felt like when I watched it, I was a fly on the wall in Christine's life. And there were moments where I just got to observe and try to understand where she was coming from. An example is when she got a police radio. We saw her set it up, figure out how to use it. We were with her in real time. And also we got to see her listening to the radio and jotting down notes and trying to make sense of things. And at one point, you could see that the wheels were turning in her mind, and she was working on tying things together and the notes that she had, which is something that helped give her a brilliant idea that she was going to pitch to her boss. But she was so excited about it, it's like she was kind of manic. She wasn't able to maintain boundaries and be a calm person. But at the same time, what was being expected of her to help make the ratings go higher, and for her to try and get a position at a different station that would help improve her career, there was so much pressure on her that as a member of the audience, I kind of got swept away with her, and I could see where she was coming from. In some ways it made total sense. Yet when she was around other people, talking about this and expressing it to them, you could see the looks on their faces and thinking something wasn't quite right with her. That was a very interesting wrinkle in how the story played out. Something else I liked about this movie was how the characters ended up interacting with Christine. From the start, we see that there are some people on staff who automatically connect with Christine and seem to be friends with her. But the men in particular, there seems to be a distant relationship, and Christine does everything in her power to keep them at a distance. She doesn't make it easy for them to connect with her or get close to her. But slowly we start to see them open up to her as they try to give her more of a chance. And so she opens up herself to take a risk on them. This gives her, it seems, some sense of hope. And yet it seems like anytime someone tries to get close to her, something happens and she ends up feeling hurt and more isolated. And this is true even with her own mother. There are also a couple of scenes that made me very curious. Christine overhears a story on a police scanner, and she finds out about this guy who owns a garage, and he actually also has a gun shop in his garage. And thinking that she needs to come up with more controversial stories, I feel like as a member of the audience, I'm led to believe that going to this gun shop is one way to do it. But there's going to be a twist that comes later in the movie regarding this shop. So I'll just give you a heads up about that. I won't tell you what it is. But I liked how it played out, because often things in life happen so coincidentally. And I think this is one of those times. I think perhaps her intention really was to do an interesting story that had to do with this gun shop. And later, since she has this resource, she gets to approach the gun shop in a different way. I'm glad that the story was told in the 1970s. Granted, this was not an easy time in history. It's a time when there was Vietnam. Women were still trying to find their voice. And there's so much more. And yet, there's also a bit of an innocence about this time. And I think that was captured well in this movie, and that it played out to an advantage in terms of the impact that the total story ends up having on the viewers. So I would definitely recommend this movie. I think it is probably not a date night movie. It's more of an introspective movie. I wouldn't suggest watching it shortly before going to bed. It's a really great character study movie. And also, as I said, it's a good time period movie. It has a lot going for it. And yet, at the culmination at the end, it will definitely stick with you. So on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being most excellent movie, in terms of quality, I would give this movie a 9. I'm not exactly sure what's keeping me from giving it a 10. I think it might be that, based on the end, I felt I was duped. And granted, that's how people, I'm sure, felt in real life as a result of Christine's story. I'm not sure I should blame the rating I'm giving the movie on that, but that's just where I'm at. Now stay tuned for the final segment of the show, when I'll be taking a look at the movie Tortilla Soup after the break.
Watching TV has changed over time. Streaming has become the new norm. That's why Golden State Media Concepts television podcast dives headfirst to the world of cord cutting. Want to be on the loop of what's hot in Netflix? Or if it's not a preference, what about original shows in Hulu? We've got you covered. Join us as we fill in the blanks and talk about movies to stream and what show you should be binging. This is the Golden State Media Concepts television podcast.
Thank you for tuning in to the final segment of the show. I'm your host, Elizabeth Aaron. In the last segment, I talked about the movie Christine. I'm now going to discuss the movie Tortilla Soup. This movie came out in 2001. It is considered a comedy, romance, and drama. It's an hour and 42 minutes long and is rated PG-13. This movie won the Outstanding Supporting Actress in a Movie Picture for Elizabeth Pena at the Alma Awards. And it won in a tie the Best Theatrical Feature Film at the Imogen Foundation Awards. This movie was directed by Maria Ripoll. She won the Bronze Pre-Columbian Circle Award for The Man with the Rain in His Shoes at the Bogota Film Festival. And that same movie won Best Film at the Sitges Catalonian International Film Festival. And she won the Best Film in Catalan language. I'm probably going to butcher this, but I'll try. For the movie Rastres de Sandal, and that was at the Gaudí Awards. And that film also won Most Popular Film of the festival at the Montreal World Film Festival. She also won Best Fiction Feature for Vivir dos Veces at Premios del Audiovisual Valenciano. Other movies she's directed include Twice Upon a Yesterday, Utopia, Your Life in 65, Traces of Sandalwood, and Live Twice, Love Once. And this movie stars Hector Elizondo. He won a Primetime Emmy Award for Outstanding Supporting Actor in a Drama Series for Chicago Hope. He's also been nominated for other Emmy Awards as well as a Golden Globe. He's also won 2 Alma Awards, one for Outstanding Actor in a Drama Series for Chicago Hope, and one for Outstanding Actor in a Made-for-Television Movie or Miniseries for Borrowed Hearts. He also won an award for Performance in a Comedy Series for Monk at the Prism Awards, and he won a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Temecula Valley International Film Festival. Although he's been in quite a bit of television, he also does have a good number of movies to his name. He's been in such movies as American Gigolo, The Flamingo Kid, Pretty Woman, Frankie and Johnny, Runaway Bride, The Princess Diaries, and Love in the Time of Cholera. In this movie, Hector Elizondo plays a father named Martin, and he has 3 daughters. One of them is played by Jacqueline Obradors. She plays Carmen, and she's been in such movies as Red Sun Rising, 6 Days, 7 Nights, and Crossing Over. Tamara Mello plays the daughter Maribel, and she's been in such movies as The Brady Bunch Movie, Tom and Huck, She's All That, and Clean. And Elizabeth Pena plays Letitia, who is the 3rd daughter. She's won several outstanding acting awards for such films as Resurrection Boulevard, Rush Hour, and Contagious. She also won Best Supporting Female for the film Lone Star at the Film Independent Spirit Awards, and she won Outstanding Actress in a Feature Film for Lone Star at the NCLR Bravo Awards. She's been in the movies Down and Out in Beverly Hills, La Bamba, Strangeland, Lost City, and Girl on the Edge. And last but not least, this movie stars Raquel Welsh. She won a Golden Globe for Best Actress in a Motion Picture, Comedy, or Musical for The Three Musketeers. She won a Career Honorary Award at the Cine Euphoria Awards and a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Imogen Foundation Awards. And she won the Bronze Wrangler Award for Fictional Television Drama, which was shared with several others for The Legend of Waxfar Woman at the Western Heritage Awards. She's been in such movies as 1 Million Years BC, Bedazzled, The Beloved, The Last of Sheila, and How to Be a Latin Lover. This movie opens with Martin. He is chopping up all kinds of vegetables and roasting them, and he's cooking up quite a feast. An interesting twist about Martin's character is that even though he is clearly a very adept, actually expert cook, he has lost his sense of taste. And for that matter, probably his sense of smell as well. We come to learn that his 3 grown daughters all live in the same house with him. And it appears that at least once a week, it's hard to tell which day, it may be Sunday, the family comes together to have a lavish meal that the father creates. He has high expectations for his daughter's appearance. They need to arrive on time. They need to have a prayer before they eat. And it appears that giving the father any feedback on his cooking is not necessarily a wise idea. This family is a Mexican-American family, and it's clear by the house they live in that there are lots of cultural accents to it, and within the family itself, there's use of Spanish at times, and their culture is something that they appreciate and is deeply embedded within their relationship. Also in the opening, we get to know a bit about each of the daughters and what their situations are. Carmen seems to be extra smart. She has a business sense about her. She has a real penchant for cooking, but her father will not allow her to pursue that as a career. It was never completely clear why that was to me, but it may simply have been that he felt his daughter had so much brilliance about her that she should use her life to do something bigger than cook. Now, Leticia is the oldest daughter, and she's a school teacher. She's a little bit older, still single, and feeling a little bit like she's past her prime. And Mirabel is the youngest daughter. She has a day job, and it seems that she may be enrolled in college. It's unclear because at a certain point she decides she's not going to college. But in a description I read of the movie, it says she's a college student. I'm not sure it matters that much, but ideally this would be clear in the movie. This family clearly has a lot of love for each other, and at the same time, they have a lot of disagreements. It seems there's always some kind of tension or some issue, some expectation they have of each other that sets them off. And as much as their father seems to want their meals to be very peaceful, usually it's the opposite. Now, they also have what appears to be a family friend. It's a woman who has a daughter. She's a single mom. It's not clear to me how they know her, how she's been close with them, but in any case, her mother comes to visit. Her mother's played by Raquel Welsh, and her mother clearly has an agenda. She loves men, she's been married a number of times, and she's ready for the next husband. So the woman friend, whose name is Yolanda, she is excited to introduce her mother to Martin. And when Martin meets her mother, it's very funny. Raquel Welsh goes over the top in terms of her character, and you just feel kind of embarrassed for her because it's clear that she's really coming on strong. And because she's so beautiful and voluptuous, it's clear also that she thinks that she can have her way with men. She wraps them around her little finger. And we get to find out, is Martin going to fall for it or isn't he? While this movie is a story of this whole family, I really think that the focus is on Martin. In many ways, I think he's the one who goes through the biggest change. He's the common denominator among all the women, and he's the only man in this family, so it's easy for the attention to be focused on him. Although there are plenty of sub-stories that have to do with his daughters' lives. And there's a sense that Martin takes a back seat to his daughters. His appearance in the film seems to be very subtle, and yet as the story culminates, it ends up really being about a decision that Martin makes. And I'm not going to give it away. It's a twist at the end. It was surprising to me, although I also saw that it was a little bit obvious. If that makes sense. I could kind of see it coming. I didn't guess that it was going to happen, is what I mean to say. In terms of his daughters, well, each of them struggles with their love life and whether or not they're going to stay at home. They struggle with what it means to leave their father, as well as their sisters, and there's apparently some level of guilt around that. It's Letitia's story that I found to be the funniest. As I mentioned, she's a school teacher, and she has been single. She's a little bit of a spinster. And one day in her classroom, a baseball gets thrown through the window. Her classroom's on the second floor, and she takes the ball and she gets ready to throw it out the window back to the team. And here she sees the new baseball coach. He is a handsome Latino man, around the same age, it looks like, as Letitia. And they seem to have a kind of funny banter. Now, the kids in the classroom want to see what they can do to pull kind of a prank on her. And they start leaving love notes. And she's made the assumption that the love notes are from this coach. And we get to see how the children find this funny. And we also get to see how feeling like someone loves her is changing Letitia. And we get to see play out whether or not this couple is going to come together. And if they do, how. There are certainly a lot of interesting bumps as these two characters get to know each other better. And now Mirabel, she gets to meet a lovely young man who is from Brazil, who is studying in the United States. She meets him because a coworker of hers is blowing him off. And a friend has asked her to lie to him for her as to the reason why she had to stand him up. Mirabel, however, opts to actually tell him the truth. This is something he seems to like, and they seem to have a chemistry right away, and he invites her out, and they just hit it off. And yet, eventually, because of the fiery disagreement that she ends up having with her father and with her sisters, she decides to leave, and she looks to this young man to essentially rescue her. Well, he likes her and all, but this was not something that was on his plan. Here, Mirabel was thinking he would be her refuge, and he really loves her, it seems, but he also had his life, and this was something that he was thrown into. So the two of them have to work this out. Now, Mirabel, being the youngest of the sisters, and not that experienced, I could totally see this scenario happening. I'd say the scenario with Letitia was a little bit more far-fetched, though funny, a bit over the top. With Mirabel, yeah, this seemed somewhat realistic, and I could buy this situation. Now, Carmen's story is something else. Carmen, as I mentioned, she's an MBA, she is very accomplished at business, though her love is actually cooking, but we get to see that she does have a way with men. She does have a man friend. It's kind of a friends with benefits relationship, but at the same time, it seems she really felt that she was exclusive with him. And this gets tested in the movie. And she gets to learn about how she's valued and how she values herself, and through that makes some big life decisions. She ends up getting a job offer in Spain. And the good thing is she speaks Spanish. She gets the job because she had a lead to work for someone, and that person was impressed with her work and decided he wanted her to work for him as an employee instead of just a consultant. But he had a big job for her. It's now up to Carmen to really tune into her soul and her heart and to figure out what she wants to do, even if it's counter to what anyone else wants her to do. And in this case, that someone else is really her dad. Does she make the safe move, or does she take a risk? But also, something else about Carmen is she is clearly a self-made woman. She has money. And early on, we get to see that she buys a condominium for herself and announces that she'll be moving out. And this is not because of a man or any other reason. And this is something that's highly controversial within the family. So Carmen really bumps up against her own desires versus the culture within the family, as well as the family's culture and traditions. And lastly, I'll mention that the family friend Yolanda has a daughter. And one day Martin goes running in the morning. This is a typical habit for him. But he comes across this young girl who is waiting for the bus. She has a lunchbox, but she's not very excited about what's in it. Since Martin is a cook, he makes a deal with her about making her lunch every day. It's really a very sweet exchange. It shows us a tender side of Martin. It shows probably what he was like when his daughters were young. Or if not, it gives him another chance at fathering. In some regards, I wish there may have been some flashbacks with him, with his young daughters, and how he was with them, so we'd have a contrast between who Martin was in the past and who Martin is now as a father figure. Overall, this was a fun movie. I would say that because there are so many side stories, I felt it did kind of distract from Martin's story. And it kind of smacked of a Hallmark movie or a television movie. The acting was good. I was convinced of who the characters were, but I didn't find them to be anything particularly unusual or special. There wasn't a true uniqueness to each of the characters that, for me, made them stand out. Now, this family is a Mexican-American family, and my guess is that is probably the main audience that it's geared towards, though I think any audience can enjoy it for sure. But I do wonder if someone who is part of that community might have a different appreciation for this movie. There may be cultural beliefs or traditions they would be more tuned into than I am, which would help them relate more deeply to the different characters. I do think the theme of home is pretty prevalent in this movie, considering this is a story about a family that is living together even as adults, and all the daughters are trying to figure out how to branch out on their own and find their own home. And as that is happening, Martin then is looking for a kind of new home for himself. And as you see the movie, you'll see that this actually plays out, both in theory and in reality. I did find the story was good. As I mentioned, with the youngest daughter, Mirabel, there were some confusions about who she was specifically. And actually, sometimes I had trouble telling the sisters apart. I think that their personalities and their stories were not so distinct that I did have a little bit of trouble tracking them at times. And in a way, it did have kind of almost a soap opera-y feel. It's a good movie. It's entertaining. Yet I wouldn't say you have to see this movie. It's definitely one that you could probably put lower on the list. What attracted me to it was that in these days I'm trying to see movies that are not so hard on my nervous system, that focus on family. It seemed like a good choice. And for that reason, I'd say it was. So I'd recommend it. And on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being a most excellent movie, I'd probably give this one a 6. A little bit better than average, but kind of on the cusp of average. I think based on who the actors are and their level of experience, I would have liked to have seen them have more challenging roles. And it is a heartwarming story. That's something to take into consideration. I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the movies Residue, which I rated a 7, Like Sunday Like Rain, which I also rated a 7, Christine, which I rated a 9, and Tortilla Soup, which I rated a 6. Here's to these movies offering you some inspiration. This is your host, Elizabeth Aaron, signing out. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Movie Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask you to please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review that really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Thank you, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Movie Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.